Hey guys, thanks for joining. Again, we are a bit early, so we're just gonna talk about life until 4:15 to give you some flavor as to what Renee and I are all about. And then at the 4:15 mark, that's when we'll get to the meat of today's session. So I actually have a couple of questions for you, Renee, but before I start on the questions, tell me about what's behind you.
Yeah, so obviously I have my MIT 2013 little banner there. So that's my undergraduate institution, studied chemical engineering, but I'm sure we'll talk more about that. During the last pandemic year, I put a lot of kind of effort into getting plants and interior, like redoing my interior decoration in the apartment since I was stuck here all the time. So got a bird of paradise here and a little monstera that I'm just starting. And then I think you can see just a little bit on the edge there, my golden pothos. So enjoying that, being a plant dad. So that's been new.
Oh, plants are the new pets, and pets are the new kids. So,
Yes.
oh,
I'll take plants over sourdough bread. It's much more pretty, but a little less tasty.
oh, I know, I know. It's either you're a plant crazed person or bread.
Seems to be the two big pools.
Yeah, exactly. I notice you also have a lot of post-it notes.
Yeah, so post-it notes are actually a funny side effect of my graduate school in design, where we use a lot of post-it notes to just express ideas. So right here is that's my workspace, and so what you see on the wall there are just a bunch of post-it notes for reminders or thoughts that I had relating to work. And then over here, I actually don't know if you can see, but I have a piano in the corner. And another one of my COVID activities was studying a little bit of music theory. So those are post-it notes with different types of minor and major seventh chords, which I practiced piano when I was a kid, but
Yeah.
I learned to like play by ear. So I never really practiced formally. And so it was just a fun activity.
That's really cool. Do you have a tutor for piano or just you and yourself and YouTube?
Me, myself, and exactly. YouTube has a lot of really good like tutorials on music theory, believe it or not.
Wow, that's really cool. I probably did the other way around, where I learned a lot of music theory for piano and
Hmm.
fell out of the classical type curriculum into more, I wouldn't say jazz, but more free flowing.
Yeah,
And then it's so fun though.
absolutely. It's a
Expressing
good
yourself
skill.
via music.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes I'll just put on Spotify playlists and then just emulate the music that I hear. It's good practice, because what I like to do is just accompany and play by ear, like I said. But my real true love is the drum set, which, if you live in an apartment, you can't really have a drum set. So I
Everyone is
have,
gonna hate you.
yeah, I've been really missing the drum set, and I used to jam with some folks around Seattle, and we would just rent out studio space, but obviously COVID impacted that too. So,
Yeah. Well, that's cool. What are you working on with the piano? What are you learning right now?
oh, it's not like really targeting any one song, but funny enough, I did this activity where I like ranked, and this is super nerdy. I ranked a whole bunch of 90s cartoon theme songs from like really good to really bad, and I have that on my piano stand, and sometimes I'll just play those by ear. So,
Oh my gosh. We have Roberto who really loves your post-it note scheme. I'm gonna pick it up as well. I love that. I love that you just post ideas on there. I used to write it in notebooks, but then I lose pages or I forget which
mhm.
notebook is which, and then I lose really great ideas.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
life or work or anything.
Exactly. Like sometimes if I don't get something down like within the few seconds that I hear it, it'll just disappear. But also it sort of like becomes a checklist because once I, finish with the post-it, just taking it down, crumbling it up and throwing it away is super satisfying.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You
Yeah,
rip out a page and you're like, I'm done. Or if
exactly.
you're in school, I remember throwing my notebook over. So I lived in like the eighth floor of this building, and I would throw my
Uh,
notebook over like through the window. I'm like, I'm done with this class.
I like that. I like
And
that.
then
I've seen a lot of different traditions like setting things on fire, throwing things away. So
I
everybody's got their thing.
yeah. And then next year, what happens is the professor's like, okay, well, remember you had your notes from last year, and I'm like, ah, shit.
Yep. Got yourself in the foot.
Really cool. I love the layout that you have. I had a question for you about, I think you actually even talked about it. It's to get you to get to know you a bit more.
Mhm.
Name three non-essential items or materials you can't live without. That I can't see right now because you've talked about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one is definitely my headphones. Not these headphones, but I like jog with headphones that are smaller. And if I'm just traveling around day to day, in the world and walking around, I'll just be listening to music. Like music is huge for me, and so I always have like my song that feels like the soundtrack for that day, or like my Discover Weekly playlist on Spotify really defines how well my week is going to go, like if it's good or bad. So I can't live without the headphones for sure.
Cool. Nice.
Let's
Your
see.
headphones
Yes. Number two.
that I can't
Things that
see.
you can't see, things
Yeah.
that I can't live without. Well, I can't live without my running shoes. I think I talked about those a little bit, but sports are also big for me. So I have a couple like favorite pairs of shoes. So I always have like a pair of shoes that I jog in until they kind of wear out. But I also play a lot of soccer and things like flag football. So my soccer spikes are also really important because soccer is my favorite sport to play. Ironically, I ended up running track in college because I'm much faster than I am skillful. But I don't have any track spikes at the moment because I'm not running competitively. But those are important to me. And then third, I can't really live without my traveling duffel bag. So I know travel has been sort of off the rails for the last year or so, but I've gotten really, really good at just throwing things in like my work backpack and one duffel bag, and I can plan for any trip, like for any length from a weekend to like 2 weeks. And I've just gotten really good at that. So I've got my system down, and I think I'm looking forward to getting back out there with regards to travel.
Oh, what are you looking forward to after? Well, I know that most of the restrictions are out, but what's one vacation that you're looking forward to?
Actually, 4th of July weekend, I'm going to St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Oh my gosh, tell me what's in your duffel bag.
So in my duffel bag, I do like the army style rolling of clothes because it saves space, but it makes for really, really dense packing. So I usually have just a few pairs of pants, depending on the weather, some t-shirts, got all my toiletries, got a cute little toiletry bag. One of the things that I travel with, which is a little odd, is one year I traveled to Japan and a friend bought me these airplane masks that you crunch them up and there's a chemical reaction that heats and warms your face, and it's super relaxing. So I like to travel with those.
Ooh, I feel
Yeah,
like you're a travel guru.
not
Before
really.
before COVID, no.
Yeah, before
Okay, before
COVID,
COVID.
definitely. It's actually funny because, with regards to especially international travel, I didn't really do that until later on in life, specifically in grad school.
Yeah.
But like within the span of 2 years in grad school, I did about 13 countries. And so I think I definitely have my travel rhythm now.
Ooh, that's funny. Um, I used to be in R&D and I didn't get to travel a lot, but ever since I got into sales, it's been nonstop travel before quarantine. And once quarantine hit,
Hmm.
it's been a lot more sedentary life. I get a lot of my time back, which is fun.
Yeah.
When you travel for work, it's very different from traveling personally.
Hmm.
I actually
Yeah,
feel
you
I
pay for
probably. Oh yeah, yeah. They pay for everything, but the point is, I feel like I don't get the time back, which is something
Yeah.
I want to do when I travel. Um,
Hmm.
One thing I'm looking forward to is my sister-in-law is graduating. Well, she graduated in 2019, but her school is actually doing graduation this year for her. And I'm
Oh,
like, why
nice.
would you do graduation 2 years later? But it's a great way to go back to my alma mater. So it's a great, my husband and my alma mater. So it's a great way to have an excuse to go somewhere.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Three things I can't live without. Running shoes, big one. I just sprained my
Yep.
ankle, so I can't really run
Oh,
at
no.
this moment. But my favorite pair of shoes is my New Balance. And I don't know the version number, but it's New Balance shoes I cannot
Yeah.
live without. Um, I probably can't live without. Ooh. Uh, Thinking on the spot here.
Hmm.
Probably my colorful markers. I
Ooh.
love making, when I take notes, it's all in
Hmm.
different colors. It looks like a painting at the end, but it's a great way
Nice.
for me to keep engaged in the conversation, or not engaged in the conversation, but engaged in the meeting.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
great way to organize things. And the last one is I can't go without, um, let's do something else. My my big straws. So I actually have like these huge. I mean, I use them for boba, but I like carrying them
Okay.
around, especially when I go out and I want to drink somewhere. So that's something I can't live without. Don't um I don't partake in the straw life, so I like bringing my own straws around.
Hmm.
Several straws because I keep losing them. So those are the
One for
three
different
things.
moods.
Sorry?
Different straws for different moods, or what? How does
Yeah.
the system work?
Oh, honestly, I have probably eight big metal straws.
Yeah.
When I say big, I mean diameter. It's quite big.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have eight of them because I feel like each month I lose one. So,
Yeah.
so after like half a year, I replenish my metal straws. Hopefully, someone else is using them for good use, or it's somewhere. Um,
Absolutely.
so I know we have several minutes, but guys, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually put out questionnaires throughout the whole talk from Straw Poll. It's for us to get to know you. I know this is a two-way conversation, so a lot of the times we're not able to get to your questions. What happens in the survey is that we're able to know what get to learn more about you, and hopefully help us direct the conversation in the way you want it to be. So whether that's resume, whether that's interview, whether that's looking for, insights on product management. Um, so be sure to participate with the straw polls. We will be taking a look at it through the whole session. Um, One of the things I've noted, actually, I'm going to ask you now. And then for viewers, they can go back in the actual recorded session and take a look at your response. But now that we have 2 minutes, why the pivot from chemical engineering to product management in tech? What drove you and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's crazy to think that, looking at the banner behind me, it's 2013. So it's crazy to think that 8 years ago I was graduating. And, my mindset when I was an undergrad was honestly like really, really focused on my course of study as sort of what I perceived as determinant to what my career was going to be. I'm going to this great, school for chemical engineering. I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to be the best chemical engineer I can be and be happy, live happily ever after, off in the sunset, all of that. And so my first job out of school was as a chemical engineer for Procter and Gamble, and I worked at this gigantic paper plant, which is a really, really interesting chemi job. We made paper towels and toilet paper, which has a very, very fascinating just chemical process behind it. Involving pulp and all these chemicals. And so two of the things that I realized when I was at Procter and Gamble was, one, I'm working at this plant, but I'm representing this gigantic CPG company with all of these different portfolios of products flying around, some succeeding, some failing. And one, I just got curious about learning more about how what I did on the engineering floor really up-leveled to sort of the higher business metrics for Procter and Gamble, like this gigantic company, but whatever the little Mahoopity plant was, actually it's P&G's largest manufacturing plant in North America. Whatever the plant did, affected total shareholder return and things like that. So just learning the structure of business, I felt like would be a really, really powerful tool in my career. And then secondly, I mentioned just the broad swath of products that P&G puts out, and just the diversity in them and the timelines that they have. Some really stick around and they change the categories that they're in, like say Tide Pods or Swiffer, and then others fail. And I wanted to learn more about the decision-making process behind what makes products succeed and what makes products not really work with customers, or what are customers looking for from the products that companies make. And so I got really, really interested in product design. And that was kind of the catalyst to my pivot, because I decided after 3 years at P&G to go to grad school. And so I went to get a dual degree, my MBA, and then also a master's in the field of design innovation, which really focuses on human-centered design, learning about why people love the products that they use, what makes a product feasible, viable, and desirable. And like I said before, I learned the art of the Post-it note, and just how do you learn what the customer is talking about, vocally, and what their unsaid needs are, and how do you craft that, present that thought, tease out the insights, so on and so forth. So on the other side of business school, I went in figuring I wanted to do product management and technology, just because it married so many of my interests as far as, the engineering mindset, the sort of innovation mindset, but also I wanted to put myself in a field where, the work that I did and the products that I influenced, they're going to be the ones that are changing how we live and work for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, 50 years. And so getting to go to Microsoft and work in artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and eventually mixed reality was fantastic. And that naturally led to where I'm at now at NVIDIA, working in AR and VR, as well as product manager. So that's kind of my pivot. And I think that what chemical engineering gave me is just one, a way to see the world in a way that I still find amazing. You
Mhm.
know, like as a kid, I was just super fascinated by the field of chemistry, but just using the engineering skills in how to problem solve and how to, work through those problems, how to present those problems to others. I think I have like a really cool tool set to dig from regardless of where I go. So that's kind of me.
Wow, that's awesome. So it seems like you came from a non-traditional background going into product management. It seems like you were still able to utilize your chemical engineering curriculum as well as your
Mhm.
experience in Procter and Gamble to help prepare you for your future experiences at Microsoft and NVIDIA. I
Yeah,
actually have further
absolutely.
questions for you, but what I'm going to do is save it for the Q&A session. That's
Perfect.
probably going to be around the 5 o'clock mark. So
Okay.
so let's get started with the session. Before I go deep into the introductions of Rene, I know he's given a brief introduction as to his history, but before I go into the introduction part, I do want to put out some disclaimers for the audience as well as for folks who are tuning in after the live session. The first mandated disclaimer is that advice is endorsed by the individual, not by the company. So the advice talked about today is not indicative of Procter and Gamble, Microsoft, nor Nvidia. It is indicative of what Rene has noticed through his experience. The second one is that this is a safe space for learning. We don't tolerate any personal attacks through the resume review sessions or offline related to Rene, myself, and Disclosed. And the third thing is not necessarily a disclaimer, but it's a qualification of why Rene has been chosen for the interview session with us. Because he has experience screening resumes or rejecting candidates for related positions, a critical step in any hiring process. So, this is to give you guys insider's view of what hiring managers are looking for in candidates from his experience. Without further ado, I'll stop talking and please introduce yourself, Rene.
Yes. So thank you for the great introduction. My name is Rene Peters. I'm currently a product manager at NVIDIA, and I've been at NVIDIA for just about 8.5 months, which is crazy to think about. It feels like I just started yesterday. What I do as a product manager at NVIDIA is my team works at the intersection of augmented reality and virtual reality, or what we would call extended reality or XR. And specifically, my role is learning about how we can integrate artificial intelligence functionalities into that extended reality. And so it's a really, really fun role where I get to study what's going on in different industries and learning about different customers in different industries, learn about their sort of day-to-day lives, what are the pain points in the processes that they go through, whether it is an auto manufacturer that's designing vehicles, or it is someone who works in architecture, engineering, and construction, or AEC, as we would say, that's designing the next, newest and coolest building. And so, how do we use AI and these different visualization technologies to make their jobs easier? And we're looking all across the board, whether it's manufacturing, architecture, like I said, or even medical and education in the future. It's a really fun role where I get to do tons of brainstorming. I get to have very, very white space conversations with folks, which is where I think I do my best thinking, trying to figure out where that gap is that a product or a service or an experience can fit to really improve the customer journey. I work on a pretty small team, so it's a relatively agile squad. There are 3 product managers in it, and the team I think is like 9 people big. And so it's a very, very cool group that's able to work on things quickly and really just passes around knowledge very fluidly. So really love the energy. Before I started at NVIDIA, I was working at Microsoft as a product marketing manager, which is sort of an interesting distinction between the two. While I was sort of learning all of the technical aspects of technologies from AI to IoT, like I said, and eventually landing in mixed reality in HoloLens in Microsoft, it was more so me figuring out how do you talk to business decision makers about why they would care about the value adds that these certain technologies would be able to bring them, their companies, their customers, their workers. And so I worked with very, very early stage technologies then as well. And so not all the time were they even products. Sometimes they were just projects. And so I did everything under the moon, from, naming products to figuring out what is the messaging and positioning framework of products, and why would the CEO care about this? Why would the chief operating officer care about this? Why would someone working on the line care about this? And forming campaigns for that, not just sort of online campaigns. Like I wrote copy for, the main websites that you would see on, Microsoft.com, but also figuring out how we would bring presence at huge conventions for technologies. Like, for instance, I did a really, really fun, exposure at National Retail Federation in New York City, which is the largest retail conference in the world, I think. And we were demoing a couple of really, really cool products that used augmented reality to help, for instance, shopkeepers visualize like what their end caps that they were going to buy would look like if you were like having branded end caps. And so it was really, really, really fun. And I think we could talk about like the difference between the two jobs, but specifically after grad school and going through business school, I thought it was great to dip my toe a little bit into the marketing space so I could understand not just, I had the engineering background, I got to make products. The Microsoft phase was sort of, I'm learning still more about the technology area, but also getting that next step of the handoff of, okay, we've made a great product, but how do we talk about it? How do we bring it to market? And now at NVIDIA, I said, okay, I feel like I've gotten a handle on the go-to-market skills for my PMM role in marketing management. And so I wanted to go back to really focusing on, defining the product and doing the initial base learning to have influence on what are features going to be, actually working with the engineers to build it out. Is this possible? And so I think I've had a really, really fun ride throughout the last few years. But that's sort of a brief intro of what my, day-to-day career, my day job looks like.
Okay, that's so actually so how do you interact with resumes and candidacies in particular through your experience at P&G, Microsoft, and NVIDIA?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've thought was super important for me to do was sort of be a voice in the room as far as bringing new and diverse talent into wherever I'm at. So I did technical interviews at all three companies, P&G, Microsoft, and NVIDIA. And so, most of the times that I've been interacting with resumes would be at some type of college fair, some type of professional job fair, think like a NSBE conference, like National Society of Black Engineers conference, or, MBA conferences, where there's sort of two modes in my mind of how I would interact, like very short and quick hitting interactions where you would come to like an NVIDIA booth or a Microsoft booth, and I would be standing at a table and you would have 2 to 3 minutes to like hand me your resume. I would scan through it and you would just give me the color commentary on, hey, what brings you here? Why are you interested in roles in product management? Why are you interested in NVIDIA? And then that interaction would either lead you to be screened out or to be sort of passed on as recommended to say, you should bring back this person for a first round interview, like a 45-minute to an hour interview. And so that's the other place where I would interact with resumes is, okay, well now I've gotten the resume beforehand. I've had time to look at it a little bit. And, I'm using it as a conversation tool through a more long form 45-minute to an hour conversation to really not just sort of get someone in the door, but understand, more about their skills, more about their leadership, more about the type of, professional that they perceive themselves to be, and some of their goals and, and what they would really bring to the company. So, both are really interesting. I would have to say I probably like getting the time, obviously, to just chat with folks a little bit more long form, because it's more relaxed. And on my end, I don't feel like I have to burn through, 30
Right.
resumes in like an hour, have a whole bunch of interactions. I can just take my time and get to know someone, which I think really works for me. But, generally, I just use resumes as a scaffolding to have in person conversations. So I have not done any resume screening where I'm just looking at the resume and then I'm just saying no or yes, they go into some other step. I'm always able to have at least a little bit of conversation with someone beforehand.
Cool. Thanks for providing some of the color of how you've interacted with resumes. As you mentioned, it's usually coupled with human interaction. Unfortunately, for today's session, we don't have the candidates in front of Rene
Mm-hmm.
today. But maybe what we can do, as opposed to using this as a, just a typical, let's go through the resume, let's comment on what works, what doesn't work. Maybe what we'll tailor this conversation around so, no, seeing this resume, what would be some of the questions you would want to ask or learn more about from the candidate?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's a little different from the typical sessions, guys. What we'll uncover today is how Renee is able to use these resumes as a not nucleation point, but as a discussion point for the interview. So, Renee, would you be able to share your anonymized resumes for the audience?
Yes. Let me make sure that I remember how to do this.
No problem. And guys, feel free to ask any questions you have throughout the talk today. There are going to be a bit of straw polls in the session, so be sure you participate in them. We'll be pulling some of the responses from those. Cool. We can see your screen, Renee.
Okay, perfect. All right. So should I just dive right in?
Yeah, let's do that.
Absolutely. So the way that I generally, scan a resume in like the first few seconds is, obviously education gives me a very quick and easy background on what kind of courses of study is this person gone through and what is the timing. A lot of times I need to pay attention to the educational information just to double check if this person is being considered for internship or full time because I've done both. And so knowing when the expected graduation is a crucial key there, but mainly just to get me in the ballpark of what is this person studying. And then I'll basically take a quick look at, technical skills are great, but I tend to look at kind of this top line here where I just see, this is the company, this is the position, this is the time. And it gives me literally like the spinal column, the skeleton of what is the conversation going to be profiled as. Like just by looking at this very quickly, I know that I'm going to be having a computer engineering conversation, and this person has, a mix of projects that they kind of work on the side. They have like full technical experience as well, where they've interned and been a research assistant. They've interned at a number of different places, right? And so I know that this person's an undergrad because they're, sorry, this person is a doctoral student because they're graduating in 2022 with a PhD. And so, just from that very, very quick scan, it just brings me into, who's sitting in front of me. I think that, the next thing I'm looking at is kind of this space. I keep right clicking this space here. I look for action words. So,
Oh.
in this Hoya Hacks project, where, I can see that they've done great. They've been awarded first place. Okay, like, what actually did they do? I'm looking at collaboration. I'm looking at they've incorporated certain technologies. They've done programming. So, they've done some collaboration. They've done a good amount, it seems, of like actual technical legwork in whatever this project is. I see some, keywords, Python, Raspberry Pi, C, Arduino, giving me a profile of, what kind of technology they're actually working with. One question that I might ask just looking at this section alone is, okay, you won first place here, you collaborated with folks and you worked with some great technology. Tell me a little bit about how you led in this project. Tell me a little bit about your leadership. And, leadership, I think, is one of the things that if you can craft your action words, like collaborated, incorporated, programmed, if you can, bring those leadership words out, at any point, I think that's really, really useful just because, this person has clearly like some technical skills. Clearly, they're able to like work on teams, even if there's not a ton of detail on it. But one thing I may look for and ask more about is specifically like, how are you a leader in the work that you've done, right?
What does it mean for you to be a leader? What action verbs are you looking for in resumes, or what kind of candidates are you looking for leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. So leadership comes in so many, so many different forms, right? It's hard to give one answer. So there's aspects of leadership where you could say, hey, here's how I taught other folks in my team. If I go back to this example, here's how I taught the rest of my team in programming, sensors and motors. Like that was my expertise, and I brought that expertise to the other members of my squad, right? And then, there's also just sort of being a quarterback. Like you don't always have to be the lead dog, the quarterback to lead, but there are tons of ways that you can show leadership just by sort of showing what you take an initiative over, like what specifically in the project were you responsible for. So in that way, this person has shown leadership in like it seems like they were the go-to person for these sensor technologies, and that seems to be their real focus within this team. But maybe talking about how they taught the rest of their team about the sensors that they were doing, or how they presented that work even outside of just their project team would have been good.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying.
All right. So now I'm looking down at sort of this technical experience bucket, and also I think it's an interesting distinction. Like one thing I might ask this person is, really lay down the clear boundary line between what is just a relevant project and what is part of your technical expertise, technical experience rather. So that's just one thing. So this is in this area, there's a bunch of like internship and research assistants roles, as well as a programmer role. And so again, I'm looking at, all right, you're working at NIST. This kind of bullet on I was selected. I think it's fine to put in there. I think there it's a balance between, do you really want to underline like how prestigious the program is, for instance? Like if you're saying selected out of like how many, or, what was the range of candidates? Were they from around the country? Were they, from around the world? So I think you can utilize this bullet to really hammer that point home. But then there's a lot of, again, construction and creation. So I'm already getting the profile of this person as kind of like a master tinkerer, I might say.
Ah,
And so they're kind of really, on project teams, they're really in the nuts and bolts. I see some of the same words, Arduino and C++ again. So some of like this person's core competency areas, I'm sort of like, lining up these commonalities uh, throughout the resume. And I think, a lot of this reading, again, is going to be the same. Like Texas Instrument, he was
yeah.
selected, or she was selected for this. They utilized a certain amount of technology. So I think, again, oh, this is good. So, one of the things that I guess I was going to say I would ask questions of was, what is the actual effect of, what your work is? And one thing that's always good is to have kind of quantifiable results that are easily, salient for the reader. Because it just gives me, like, you can have all the expertise in the world, but it's about how did you put that to work to make a difference on your project teams. And so my question was going to be like, okay, tell me about the effect that, all your creation and construction has had. And so this is one space where I see that this person has, they've been able to reduce cycle counts by some measurable amount. Um,
Yeah. So in
yeah.
our last session, one of the things we talked about was also the quantifiable metric. One question
Hmm.
that a candidate did have was, well, a viewer did have was, well, if it's a school project, how would I be able to understand the effects of what it does? Um, his response from the previous, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is talk about hypothetical measurement tools. So, what was the aim of the program? Was it supposed to decrease cycle time by X%, or were you looking at increasing, throughput? What were you looking to
Mhm.
do with the program that you're
Yep.
implementing? What are your thoughts on that? Is it okay to put hypothetical measures?
Yeah, no, I think that there's kind of an art. One, I think that presenting quantifiable results is just so important from the resume reader's understanding. Like you have to understand that impact, and to make it as easy as possible is very important. So there's a little bit of an art to like finding those quantifiable metrics, and it's not like synthesizing them out of nothing. But there's usually some things that you can point to, whether it is, I taught this amount of people expertise in the sensors that I was working with. I worked with, you know, I implemented like a certain number of sensors, or,
Yeah.
my sensors read some certain amount of, readings to certain amount of accuracy and a certain amount of, cycles, talking about cycle time. So I think there's a lot of different angles, but the most important thing is that you're giving the reader like some kind of anchor point. And those numbers are really, really anchor points. And
Yeah.
so I think, if I look broadly across this person's resume, one of the things that I am probably looking for more, and I'm gonna have to put more energy in like asking and teasing out, are more of these
Ah,
quantifiable metrics.
cool. So conscious of time, it seems like
Yeah.
one of the things that you've noted from this resume is that this person is someone who can execute quite well and may be
Mhm.
seen as a subject matter expert for their particular instances. But based off of the action verbs that you use, so selected, utilized, enhanced, integrated, programmed, it's all um, typically in industry we like using individual contributor type roles, which is
Yeah.
fine. But it has a different connotation than if you were to lead a team, if you were to influence the people around you to buy into the vision that you have. Would you agree that
Yeah.
that's one of the main things you want to take away from this resume?
Absolutely. And I would need to confirm like leadership ability more, but I think it makes sense for someone who's,
Yeah.
a PhD who likely has a very, very, very narrow expertise that is expressed very deeply.
Yes.
So, not everybody has to be a people manager, right? Like I'm not a people manager at NVIDIA, although I'm a product manager. I lead teams kind of indirectly. So leadership is a good quality to have, but it's just one of those things that I would ask more questions about. So cool.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think this it's a functioning resume. It's fine. I think broadly, I would say it needs more quantifiable results. Yeah,
Hmm.
and yeah.
We did have a question for from Orlando. What if the candidate does not have the relevant experience, sorry, relevant education, but does have the relevant experience? So let's say if you were to apply for Microsoft and you
Mhm.
didn't have the MBA or you didn't have the master's, how do you think that would relate to your candidacy?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that people do like to see, at least on a top line, like, oh, this course of study kind of broadly lines up with the space that this person is going into. Like, I'm a chemical engineer by training, by background. So it's not like I'm coming into product management in AR and VR with a huge amount of knowledge on foveated rendering or, deep, learning integration with computer vision. Like, these are things that I'm kind of learning on the job now. So I do think it's more so, and at least when I talk to candidates, I'm very much meeting you where you're at. Like I'm going to ask you about, give you chances to give those stories of where you might have like learned those skills or where you might have expressed those skills, outside of your course of study. And really, one of the big things that I look for in all of the stories that I hear from the candidates is just learning ability. Because at the end of the day, sort of going back to what I was talking about with my undergrad, like I thought I was just gonna gain 100% chemical engineering skill and go be a great chemical engineer. But reality is that you're very rarely going to be like having the very exact perfect course of study for the exact role that you're applying for. And a lot of it is flexible. You're going to be learning on the job. So is this the type of person who learns from others and knows how to get information quickly? I think that's also very important. So I don't think that the course of study itself is going to be a sink or swim. There are many other ways to evaluate like the learning skill, and then, has this person gone outside of the course of study to pick up some relevant expertise too.
Cool. Thanks, Orlando, for your question. Roberto is asking, is there a rule of thumb that you like seeing with bullet points? Three, two, I'm presuming you don't like five or six.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 is a good sweet spot for me.
Yeah.
I think just because usually if you have more than 5 or 6 bullets on any one kind of role, it had better be usually like something that you've done for like 5 years or something like that. Because I think in the resume format, if you're using 5 or 6 bullet points on something that you've been in that role for like 1.5 years, 2 years, it's just
Yeah.
it's probably an inappropriate level of detail for the summary.
Exactly. And I like to see resumes that are one page. And there's a debate that goes
Yeah.
on is, oh, if you have 10 or plus more years, you should have multiple pages. I think one page is enough, to be honest. If you know what your value is, your one page should be able to communicate how you're giving value to that organization through your experiences. And there are going to be other tools that hiring managers will utilize, LinkedIn, social profile, networking, to understand the whole, I guess, the color around you, whereas the one piece of
Hmm.
paper does not. I
Yeah, no,
hope,
I'm in full agreement of that.
cool.
One page only. Please keep put forward your best one-page story.
Awesome. Roberto, I hope that answers your question and Orlando as well. Let's move on to the second, and I think we have a couple more resumes.
Yeah, I think there were 4 on here. So, um, well, okay. Again, I'm looking at the top line education. That gives me a good, sort of understanding this person's completed a bachelor's, and they've also done, looks like, an associate's in language and rationality, which I would be very curious in how that coursework has sort of um, fed into their technical toolbox and project examples. Technical toolbox, I get it. This probably, like format wise, takes up more space than it should, but not that I really care. I'm just trying to get the information, but they might want to consider squashing this a little.
Mhm.
Um, the
I've
project
typically
is,
heard two. Usually, if it's not that many, if you take a look at how many, I guess, skills that they have within Toolbox, I
Mhm,
would just lump them all together into
mhm.
one line because now you get more space to talk about your project examples or technical programs.
Absolutely. And it does look like this person could use that. If I'm just looking at this with like soft eyes, it looks like these lines are very, very, they're a bunch of headlines. And it seems like it would probably be hard for me to, and then this is the reason why having those actual in person to person conversations are important. If I was just a resume reader who only had the resume, I think that this would be kind of hard to pull a good profile of
Yeah.
this candidate out. Like I get a good sort of swath of what kinds of project examples that they've worked on. So video games, web, sports cards, like I get the profile, but um, there's definitely more room here to talk about, results. I see action words here: developed, created. There's some lines like this, like customer has ability to empty their purchase history of cards. That's a feature that they develop, but that could be probably reworded and maybe combined with an actual quantifiable metric. So at first blush, I think this resume feels like it has room for more. Like it's definitely got the direction there, and I see where this person is going. But I think that I would probably spend a lot of time with this person in conversation, just getting them to fill out more of the detail in these lines, and that could probably have been better spent time just talking about the qualities that they bring to the workplace, like leadership or ingenuity and decisiveness, things like that.
Yeah, I think this resume, in my opinion, needs a bit more work in terms of how they portray themselves. I think this resume
Mhm.
does a really good job if you have a sales pitch, I would say. It
Okay.
doesn't talk about hi, him or herself in the light that if I were to hire you, what should I be expecting as your value
Hmm.
to the organization? It seems like a mishmash of stuff, which is great, but it might be
Yeah,
better if you highlighted your top three accomplishments, the things that you're proud about, and why you're proud about the delivery of that. Maybe it was
and build that
complex.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is sort of just like a list of objects. So like, who are you working with? Did you lead teams?
Hmm.
Also the results piece. The lines could definitely be more descriptive here, and they may, like you said, have done well by just saying, here are the three most recent ones. I'm just going to dig in a different level of detail into those, and then if you want to bring out, some of these other stories later, they can come out later.
Gotcha. Awesome. Moving to the next resume.
Okay, we've got a full stack engineer. We've got skills, and I think it's interesting that education is in the middle because I'm always looking for education first. And so they've got a certificate, they got their master's in 2016. So I can see why they put education in the middle because they're relatively seasoned and they're a while out from their master's education.
Mhm.
Um, I actually don't know what the rule of thumb is for when you would move education on from the top. I'm just used to always seeing education on the top.
You know what I've noticed? It's when folks are graduating from university, they usually put it up top. Um, if they have a certain number of years, or if they're
Mm-hmm.
more experienced mid-stage career professionals, they usually put it on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want to highlight your university, that's usually up top. So all in all, what I've heard and what I've noticed is early career professionals put it up top, mid stage, late stage is usually on the bottom. And so that probably explains why you see it more on the top
Yeah,
is you're
yeah,
in
that makes sense.
these, yeah,
I'm a
university career fairs.
university recruiter. Exactly,
Exactly,
exactly.
exactly.
So, okay, then I'm looking at the profile of technical experience, and it seems like from this one foundation, they have a number of different projects that they've worked on
Hmm.
um, as a front end engineer. I see action words, I see develop, redesign, architected. One thing that's good is it looks like right off the bat, I see really like sort of tangible metrics. Like I've increased the sign up process by this much. I'm getting a good sense of some of the work that they've done, the education that they've done, day to day tasks. Um, architected, okay, architected how much? They've done 3 different API endpoints. Um, Reduced 50% of page load time. So this person, I feel like, is doing a good job of bringing not just the what am I doing, but like what
Right.
was the result forward, right? And so I think that this is good. I think maybe I would probably be teasing out again like that leadership experience, in the foundation as a front end engineer, like who are you working with, how do you interact with sort of your colleagues and that kind of thing. But it seems like their individual contribution is very well organized. I probably have a question too on what exactly they consider the difference between like or again just underlining to make sure I understand the delineation between the technical experience and the work experience. It seems like this is more just like a volunteer thing that they've done and got technical experience for, but I'd want to confirm that. So they've also worked for 2 Oakland organizations throughout different times. One they were at 7 years. So
Wow.
I'd be really, really curious to understand. And again, they've surfaced really kind of like two solid summary bullet points. One has a ton of metrics in it, like they've increased these two kind of curriculum from X to Y, and then this next bullet point gives a broad um, swath of the programming courses. But clearly, 7 years is something that I'm going to want to stop and ask more questions about. But again, it achieved over 96% success rate. Like I can tell that they're really really good about bringing forth the effect and impact, and that makes my conversation with them a lot easier. Their volunteer experience, almost in the face of all of the other detail that they've given, looks kind of like minute. So I'd probably ask a question there as well, because it's kind of just like dropped at the end. But maybe there's an interesting story in there. But I would say that this is overall like a pretty solid resume. I would have more questions about, interactions with peers and colleagues, but the individual contribution. Okay, so they equip teachers, so they did some kind of like leadership even amongst the teachers as a teaching coordinator. So it seems like I would have a lot of good stuff to talk with this person about.
Awesome. Even though it's not directly, so this person is a full stack engineer, I believe, is what
Yeah,
you
they were.
mentioned before. In the
Mm-hmm.
work experience, it doesn't seem relevant to the full stack engineer. It, I guess if you were to look at it face value, but what you're able to extract from it is how they're able to work as a team. So it's quite important that they do talk about leadership skills outside of just the typical, these are my projects that I've worked based off of my curriculum. What I do like about this and the previous resume, I completely forgot, is how they link their resume to their portfolio. I know for university
Mm-hmm.
recruitment, you probably don't have access to it, but
Yeah.
imagine if you had a list of resumes. I'm sure you'd go on and actually take a look at some of the projects that they're able to deliver.
Yeah, I don't get to do that very, very often,
Yeah.
but there have been some candidates who have like had like a QR code when I'm sitting with them, and they're like, "Oh, I did this, this, and this," and that's always fun. But
Ooh.
yeah, like you said, it doesn't happen that often. But this candidate here, I think it kind of makes sense because they, did their bachelor's, but then their master's is in education.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to hear about, yeah, just their journey using that in education, and then they do express the full stack, explicitly the full stack expertise in their kind of volunteer technical experience too. So throughout those express skills, it seems like the story actually really makes a lot of sense for this candidate. And like I said, I feel like this is probably a pretty easy conversation to have.
Awesome.
And there's one more, right? Or do we have
Yes.
time and
We have
everything?
one more. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's do the last one.
Okay. Okay. So I've got, yep, bachelor that they completed a couple years ago. This is interesting. They gave a lot of space to this fellowship, which I would be really curious to ask a lot about. Here's sort of the thing I was talking about before. They've, clearly it's a prestigious program, and so I'd be curious to ask about that, and talking about all the different skills that they've gained. So they have an economics and Python background through their fellowship that they're still doing. They did that pretty recently, so I'd be curious to ask him sort of what made him chase down that extra bucket of skills, him or her chase down that extra bucket of skills, and how it's been going for them. As far as their experience, I see they've done various shades of research coordination, um, policy analyst, policy and supervision analyst. So I'm curious about how the policy world kind of intersects with their interests as well. It looks like that was just a summer internship that they did. But again, this person just recently kind of completed their bachelor's degree. I see, some action, some pretty like surface level action words of engaging and performing, and they've presented certain things. Um, it probably, let's see, it's reasonably well balanced, and I do see that there are some like quantifiable um, metrics here for the amount of report series that they've supported, and how many sponsors that they've worked with within those report series looks like. And then they have their skills and leadership and mentorship at the bottom as well. Yeah, I see this person is paying attention to kind of like balance between the skills, experiences that they had like direct responsibility for, and then ones that they have sort of volunteered for at Ball State. And I know that's where this person went to undergrad, but they're still involved in this capacity to, yeah, regarding recruitment and retention. So
Hmm.
I think it's interesting. I'm probably, if I'm hiring this person for a product management role, I definitely want to hear more about, um, digging into this piece and how they've started to learn about sort of the quantitative and qualitative skills that they've gained, and a little bit more about how um, they've learned some of those analytical skills also in research. It
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily jump off of the page here, so that may be one area I would want to see brought out further. But section wise, it seems like a pretty reasonably balanced resume for someone who's graduated with a bachelor's just a couple years ago.
Cool.
Um, so yeah,
Roberto had another question for you, specifically around education and what to indicate as part of the coursework. I've noticed
yeah,
that I think there's only one resume that spoke through the relevant coursework.
yeah.
So Roberto's question is, as a recent graduate from an MBA, would it be helpful to list the relevant courses taken that would be appropriate to support the candidacy for a specific position?
If you have stories behind them, I think it's fine. Like in business school, I took a technical product management course, like explicitly. And it's funny, I actually worked on a project with Microsoft, but I didn't actually put that on my resume. I actually brought it in, I worked it into the conversation. So it was just another one of those space things for me. Like I didn't really have room on my resume to dig into coursework. And I've just taken so many courses at the point, especially after grad school, that I think it's fair game if you think it is very, very targeted towards the conversation that you're going to have.
Hmm.
Um, but my personal taste is I don't really think it like I don't really think it matters. It continues to give me a profile beyond just your course of study. But
Hmm.
honestly, I think you can just, since I'm always having conversations with folks, they can always just bring any particular course or like project story up with me that they had during their courses.
Gotcha. From my perspective, I feel that if it's I can only relate to chemical engineering, so I know what is part of the chemical engineering degree. But if they
Mm-hmm.
were to put distillation, separations, that's typical of most chemical engineering curricula.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no point in talking about something that everyone else has. But if you took
Yeah.
something that's an elective where you're passionate for air pollution or human bonding, things that put some color as to who you are as a chemical engineer or as a software developer, I think that is fair game. And
Yep.
if you want to talk about it, I think that, especially in a good light, it shows who you are as a person, where you're passionate for, and why, if you can relate why you took those courseworks and how it's related to how that makes you better as a person in that particular job. I think I welcome it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very true. Being unique and memorable as well as relevant, because
Yeah.
there are things that, are table stakes. Like, of course, you've taken a distillation course if you're a chemical engineer or separations, right? But if you have done like you took a class where you did a really, really interesting project in like a developing country and something that is going to like stay at the table after you leave, I think that's always cool to talk about. So unique and relevant. Yep.
Cool. Okay, so at the end of typical sessions, what we like doing is ranking the resumes. But what we've done in the last few sessions is instead of ranking them, it's a
Uh-huh.
go or no go. So when I say go, it's would I take this person to a full-fledged 45-minute to 60-minute interview, understanding that you didn't have that 2-minute face-to-face time.
Yeah, yeah,
So
sure.
in this case, would you want to meet this person for that 2 minute or for the 45 to hour long interview?
Yes. So with this resume, I think the profile that I got from it was that, they, I want to hear more about the leadership, but it's generally a fine functioning resume. So I think this would be fine to have either a full interview or, a quicker interaction. So this would be a go for me. I would definitely pass this one forward. This one, I think this one leaves me with a ton of questions. I think again, the general consensus that we both kind of had was that this one could use a little bit more massaging and building out. So I don't think I would pass this one forward. But again, I think this person has the skeleton there. They just need to build. They just need to build it out, right? And I feel like I would
Agreed.
spend a little bit too much of the conversation just doing the work through the conversation of doing the build out when we could have been talking about this person's kind of individual characteristics. Um, this one I felt pretty good about. So I think this one is pretty solidly a go. They did a really good job of lacing kind of not just the experience and how they interacted with it, but also their impact. And
Hmm.
so that allows me to have really, really interesting conversations. So I feel like I'm at the point where I could have a productive conversation and figure out like how they would fit with my company or certain teams. And then this one, I think this one was well structured. I think that, given the span of one skills that this person has and that they're currently, complementing their economics background with a lot of this data Python fluency training, I would want to hear more of that brought out and, specifically have the links more clearly brought out as far as their actual experience, why, how they're bridging that gap to more of the like specifically text based, if I'm thinking like product management for me. So I would want to have like the 2 to 3 minute conversation to tease that out. But
Hmm.
I don't think I would necessarily pass this one on for like a full interview just yet. They need like a little. I need to ask a couple questions on this. I'm not immediately gonna like toss this one, but I think they're almost there.
Okay. So it seems that one and three, you are more likely to include them in a, you're more likely to invite them for a longer session, whereas four, sorry, not two and three, one and three,
Yep.
um, and then four, it seems like you will need that 2 to 3 minutes to feel out what the candidate is like, if they can
Yep.
give a bit more color and clarify some of the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. You can feel free to stop sharing your screen. Um, but
Okay.
what I'm gonna do is there were survey polls throughout the conversation, one being there's only enough time for one question, clearly, because we're
Oh
like
no.
out of time, but that's okay. Um, what are the, so there were two questions that were voted for with equal voting numbers. So
All right.
I'm gonna choose one of them. So sorry, guys, if actually there's three, so that doesn't really help. Guys, please vote now because I'm not going to ask all three questions to him. So, okay. Oh gosh. Tell
Are you
me.
are you giving my contact information after this? Like, if
Ooh.
people want to ping me on LinkedIn, that's fine too.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. Guys, remember to connect with Rene afterwards. I think he's opening up that invitation. Just make
Mhm.
sure when you connect with him, instead of it being, a rando, just say, hey, saw you in Disclosed, would love to connect with you, and then ask your question, just so it's,
Perfect.
relevant and he knows where you're coming from. So I'm going to choose one random question. What's one thing you wished you had done in university or your early days that could have helped you better prepare for your current role?
Ooh, I mean, I think the story, like I said, about my undergrad was I was just so focused on my course of study. And I think that drew me a little bit too far in, right? I kind of had a little bit of chemical engineering tunnel vision. And, I obviously went back and ended up getting my business degree and design degree for a reason. But if I could have taken, challenged myself to take like a econ class or something like that, that would have helped me understand a lot about some of the areas that I eventually ended up being curious about. And honestly, I think studying something like econ, I was looking at it and saying like, oh, I'm never going to need to use that, but it is useful layer of understanding in a lot of different places in life. And so I think, it's not so much that I would redo because, I think I definitely got the most out of my college experience. But just given the fact that I ended up broadening my swath anyway, I feel
Hmm.
like I could have given myself more leeway to not just be rigidly chemical engineering focused during my study.
Ah, Very cool. It goes to show that and I had the same thing too going through my curriculum. I thought I was going to be an amazing process engineer at this manufacturing plant. Realized quite quickly that wasn't the life for me, and then
Yep.
pivoted. Um, but what I wished I had done was taken more of the cooler classes that would have been more focused on project teamwork than really
Yeah.
learning the engineering principles, the chemical engineering principles. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And can I
so
add another answer to that question?
yeah.
I also think that, um, like I said, I went through undergrad very focused on the job I was going to have on the other side of undergrad. But I think there were so many bigger questions I could have been asking myself at that time, less on the job that I was going to have, but more so what kind of impact do I want to have, out in the professional world and beyond. And you'll have to excuse me, there's apparently an emergency outside, but hopefully that's not interfering. But yeah, I think a lot of the thinking that I do now is not just, how do I be a great product manager and put, great products out that change lives, but also other avenues of creating change. Like I'm volunteering in the city of Seattle on this tech advisory board where I get to work with the mayor and the city council's office on digital equity and privacy and cybersecurity and smart city innovations. And that's like just a complete volunteer role where I get to learn a lot about like state and local politics. And
Ooh.
eventually I want my career to impact legislation. Like I would love to be in some kind of science and technology advisory role outside of just my day job. So if I could have sort of been less just job and capitalism
Yes.
focused when I was an undergrad too, I think that would have been helpful because I could have started putting some of those stepping stones there early. And the impact that you have is not just going to be your job, nor should it be. So yeah.
Gotcha. No, that's clear. One of the things I loved about undergrad was how I worked as a person in team settings. I
Hmm.
don't think that I feel like depending on the type of schoolwork, sometimes project teams can be a bit of a burdensome, I guess, topic.
Yeah.
Um, but for my senior design, we got to choose our own members. So I figured out what type of person I was in the team setting, what I liked
Mm,
doing, and what I liked
yeah.
delegating out.
That's super important because, like I
Yeah.
said, there's tons of different ways to lead in a team, and you
Hmm.
may not be like, honestly, I sometimes I feel like I'm not like the quarterback type. Like I like to be the person that comes up with like the weird idea on the team and sort of just testing the boundaries, but someone else is focused on like just the cadence of pushing the overall work forward. Like
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like having that responsibility is a little bit it drags on me and
Oh,
it
for
means
sure.
that I spend less like creative time and I'm more just focused on getting to the next checkpoint or some type of logistical something that I don't really care that much about. So
Yeah. No, that's
finding
fair.
out what you like to do on teams and how you interact with others and add to their skills is important too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Renee. I know we are 10 minutes over. But what folks, you guys can do is feel free to connect with Renee. If you're not part of the live session, he's more than open to connect with you offline as well. Just be sure to note the disclosed reference when you connect with him. One thing that I've noted in the chat, guys, is if you guys could post your favorite quote on LinkedIn, be sure to tag Renee, me, and disclose. What we'll do is we'll select one random, I guess, person or winner to have a one-on-one with Renee and myself. Well, one to two with Renee and myself to talk about career, resumes, mock interviews, what we typically look for in candidacy. I'm specifically from a broader general role, whereas Renee can speak more towards his experience in chemical engineering, consumer CPG, as
Mm-hmm.
well as product management in tech. So, without that, is there one last thing you want to leave with the viewers?
Yeah, I think that final note that I talked about on asking yourself the bigger questions is the note that I would want to leave with everyone. And we came here to talk about resumes and how to get the job, but one of the things that I think makes those conversations, like when I'm talking to a candidate, much more interesting is if they can tell me kind of their greater vision for what they want to do outside of their role and how what their professional role might feed into that. I think that that's a really, really interesting way to show that you are purposeful and, you know, serious about what you're doing, but also just from a mindset perspective,
Hmm.
it shouldn't just be about the job. Like you should be in the room to, you know, learn something that helps you be greater. And that's the kind of energy that I think makes companies greater. So ask yourself the bigger questions.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Renee. It was really great having you in today's interview session. We'll do a follow-on session to reflect on today's one-on-one. But what we'll do is I'm gonna close the call shortly after, and we'll chat
Mm-hmm.
after.
Okay, perfect. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Renee. It was nice having you.
All right.
Bye.